She can't possibly understand what we're saying. Omar Khalil's voice rang out, his smirk unmistakable as he glanced at the black waitress moving between the tables. The other guests chuckled, their attention momentarily drifting to Tasha Miller, a quiet woman carrying a tray of drinks with precision. Omar, a billionaire CEO with the world at his feet, thought she was just another part of the background, a worker, invisible, insignificant. But what Omar didn't know was that Tasha wasn't just a waitress. She wasn't just the woman serving them drinks and refilling their wine glasses. She was a force waiting to be acknowledged. Omar continued, I mean, how could someone like her possibly have any understanding of business? His words cut through the air like a knife. Laughter echoed through the private dining room, but Tasha stood there, silent. Her expression remained neutral, her face betraying nothing. But inside, she knew exactly who she was, and who she wasn't going to let anyone else define her as. What they didn't know was that this wasn't just any night, and Tasha was about to make sure they would never forget it. From across the room, her 12-year-old son, Jordan, who had been quietly watching the proceedings, stood up, his small frame barely visible behind the tall chairs and opulent tables. But when he spoke, his voice was steady, clear, and without a hint of hesitation. My mom speaks 9 languages, he said. The room went silent. Omar stopped mid-sentence, his eyes narrowing. The other guests paused, confused. Jordan wasn't the kind of kid to speak out of turn, yet his words hung in the air, undeniable. The laughter died down, replaced by a tense quiet. Omar Khalil raised an eyebrow, skepticism written all over his face. He chuckled, thinking it was a joke. Oh really, he said with a dismissive tone, still not believing a word of it. What languages could she possibly speak? Jordan stood tall, unwavering. Arabic, French, Japanese, Mandarin, and more. The words hit like thunder. Omar's smile faltered, his confidence slipping for the first time. He had no idea what he was about to walk into. Tasha, who had been quietly observing, now stepped forward. She looked Omar in the eye, her expression calm and collected, as if she were stating the most obvious fact in the world. I speak Arabic, French, Japanese, Spanish, and I can keep going, she said. Her voice was low but firm, cutting through the tension in the room. Omar's smug expression faltered. The room, once filled with whispers of amusement, was now gripped in stunned silence. People shifted in their seats, unsure of how to respond. Omar's face went pale as he realized the gravity of his mistake. The woman he had dismissed so easily wasn't just a server. She was an intellectual powerhouse. She was everything he had underestimated in a single moment. The shock was visible on his face, as if the room itself had flipped upside down. This wasn't the outcome he had expected. He had underestimated her. And now, he would have to face the consequences. The silence stretched on, but it wasn't an uncomfortable one. It was a silence that spoke volumes. And Omar, for the first time that evening, was the one left speechless. Omar Khalil stood frozen in place, his confident smirk replaced with a confused frown. His eyes scanned Tasha Miller, who stood calmly, her posture as unyielding as a stone wall. The entire room had shifted in energy. What had just happened? One moment, he had been enjoying his upper hand, dismissing Tasha as nothing more than an invisible part of the background. The next, she had turned the tables with nothing more than a simple, undeniable statement from her son. Tasha, on the other hand, showed no sign of panic. She had been the object of their ridicule, yet now the power was in her hands, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. With a measured breath, she straightened her back. I've worked hard to get here, she continued, her voice carrying across the room. I didn't get to where I am by playing games or letting people decide what I can and can't do. Omar blinked, his mind racing as he processed her words. This wasn't just about language. It wasn't even just about him underestimating her. No, this was about a woman he had assumed was beneath him, showing him just how wrong he was. The air in the room felt thicker now, charged with something electric. People exchanged glances, unsure of how to react. The billionaire CEO, who was used to controlling every room he entered, was now facing an unexpected reality. His arrogance, once his greatest weapon, had failed him spectacularly. Omar could feel his grip on the situation slipping. He hadn't even seen it coming. You can speak 9 languages, sure, Omar said, trying to regain control, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. But that doesn't mean you're important. Tasha met his gaze, unwavering. It means I'm more than just what you see, she replied quietly, but her words held the weight of something much deeper. The room fell silent. The usual hum of chatter that accompanied every high-stakes meeting was now absent. Even the waiters who had once seemed like invisible servants now paused, listening. It was clear, something had changed. It's easy to dismiss someone when you think you have everything, Tasha continued, her words flowing like a quiet storm. But you never know the depth of a person's worth until you stop looking at them through the lens of your own arrogance. Omar didn't respond immediately. His mind raced, and for the first time, he wasn't sure what to say. The tables had turned, and he, the man who had always been in control, was no longer sure of himself. He looked around the room at the faces of his colleagues, now watching him with different eyes. The once comfortable atmosphere had dissolved into one of tension, as if everyone was waiting for him to act, waiting for him to do something to salvage the situation. But he didn't know what to do. Tasha had said nothing grand, nothing that screamed defiance. She had simply told him who she was, and in doing so, had made him question everything he had assumed about her and about himself. The silence stretched on, and Omar felt the weight of his words now hanging in the air like a thick fog. He had underestimated her, and now, the very people he had tried to impress, the very room full of powerful individuals, were seeing him as weak, uncertain. He had no control here. The realization hit him like a freight train. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Tasha, on the other hand, stood tall, calm, and in complete control of the moment. The power in the room had shifted, and there was no going back. Omar Khalil's mind raced as the silence stretched on, his thoughts jumbled. This wasn't just about his company anymore, or the deal he had been so sure of. This was about something far deeper. Tasha Miller, the woman he had so easily dismissed, had not only exposed his arrogance, but had made him question everything he thought he knew about power. She stood before him, calm and composed, her quiet confidence more unsettling than any loud confrontation could have been. The room remained still, each person unsure of how to react. Omar, once the man who controlled every situation, found himself uncertain and exposed. He had thought Tasha was just a servant, another face in the crowd, but now he realized she was someone he could not easily dismiss. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing around at the faces of his colleagues, but no one spoke. No one moved. It was as if the room had collectively decided to hold its breath, waiting to see what Omar would do next. The seconds felt like minutes. He had always prided himself on his ability to navigate any situation, to dominate any room. But now, faced with the undeniable fact that he had been wrong, he felt small. He had underestimated Tasha. His gaze flickered back to her. She wasn't boasting about her intelligence or listing her accomplishments. She didn't need to. Her mere presence, her quiet defiance, was enough to turn the tables. She wasn't asking for recognition. She was showing him that he couldn't control everything, that he had no right to assume superiority over her simply because of his wealth. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Omar spoke, his voice low and strained. I was wrong, he said, his words feeling foreign on his tongue. I underestimated you. Tasha's eyes met his without hesitation. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply nodded, as if acknowledging something that should have been obvious from the start. The tension in the room was palpable, but it was also a turning point. Omar had lost the upper hand. The power dynamic had shifted. The once silent Tasha, the woman who had been nothing more than a background figure in the eyes of the room, was now at the center of the conversation. Omar knew that this moment would change everything. He could feel the weight of the eyes on him, the quiet judgment of the people he had once thought would never question him. Tasha had shown him that power wasn't just about money or status. It was about respect, about recognizing the value in people beyond the surface. And now, Omar understood that. He didn't expect her to forgive him or for everything to go back to the way it was. But he knew that he would never look at Tasha or anyone else the same way again. Omar Khalil sat back in his chair, the weight of his earlier words hanging over him like a storm cloud. He had expected a smooth, straightforward evening, but instead, he had found himself standing on unfamiliar ground. The room, once filled with the hum of business talk and the clinking of glasses, now seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Tasha Miller, the woman he had so carelessly overlooked, stood tall, her presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. There was no arrogance in her stance, no need to prove herself. Her mere existence was enough. Omar could feel the shift in the atmosphere, and for the first time, he wasn't sure how to move forward. He had been humbled in a way that no business deal had ever managed to do. The silence that followed his admission hung heavy, but Tasha didn't seem to mind. She wasn't waiting for his apology. She wasn't waiting for anything at all. She had already shown him her worth without asking for recognition. It was a quiet, powerful moment that resonated more deeply than any loud confrontation could have. "I know you didn't mean to disrespect me," Tasha said, her voice steady but filled with an undeniable strength. "But the truth is, you did. And you weren't the only one." She glanced around the room, her eyes meeting those of the other guests, each one looking back with a mixture of surprise, guilt, and admiration. Omar followed her gaze, realizing for the first time that the people in this room weren't just witnesses to the exchange, they were participants in it. They had seen him dismiss Tasha without question, and now they saw her for who she truly was. The powerful silence that filled the space was no longer uncomfortable, it was liberating. Tasha wasn't just teaching Omar a lesson. She was teaching everyone in the room. She was showing them that true power wasn't about money or status. It wasn't about who spoke the loudest or who held the most influence. True power was about dignity. It was about standing your ground, even when the odds were stacked against you. It was about refusing to be overlooked, even when the world told you that you didn't matter. Omar's mind was still racing, trying to process everything that had just happened. He had thought he was the one in control. He had thought he understood the rules. But Tasha had shown him that he had been playing by the wrong rules all along. She had done more in a few moments than most people could in a lifetime. And as he sat there, humbled, he realized that the lesson she had taught him was one that would stay with him forever. The night wasn't over, but it had already been changed forever. The power dynamic in the room had shifted, and it wasn't just Tasha who had changed. It was everyone, Omar included. He looked at Tasha once more, his eyes filled with respect. For the first time, he saw her as she truly was, not just a woman in the background, not just a server, but someone who could teach him things he had never even considered. The real lesson, Omar realized, was not in the languages Tasha spoke or the power she held. The real lesson was in her ability to hold herself with such grace, such dignity, that it made everything else seem irrelevant. And in that moment, Omar knew that he would never again take anyone for granted, not the way he had taken Tasha, not the way he had taken so many others. As the evening wore on, Omar Khalil felt the weight of his earlier actions pressing down on him. He could no longer escape the realization that his entire perception of power had been wrong. What had started as a simple dinner meeting had turned into a lesson in humility, one that he never expected, but desperately needed. The guests around the table, who had once laughed at Tasha and her son, now seemed to shift uncomfortably in their seats, their glances darting back and forth, as if they too were reflecting on what had just transpired. The room, once filled with the noise of business chatter, now felt heavy with introspection. Tasha, however, remained unaffected by the change in the atmosphere. She continued to do her job with the same calm grace she had always shown, as though nothing had changed, though in reality, everything had. It was as if she had already won. And in many ways, she had. Omar realized that his usual methods of asserting dominance, wealth, status, and arrogance, were nothing more than empty tools when faced with true character. Tasha had shown him that. He had been so focused on power that he had failed to see the true strength of those he had once overlooked. He glanced at Tasha once more, this time with a deeper sense of respect. She wasn't just a waitress, or a mother, or someone from the margins of society. She was a force that had quietly, but undeniably, shifted the balance in the room. It was a rare and humbling experience for someone like Omar, who had always been in control. He had built his empire by being ruthless, by outsmarting everyone around him. But none of that had prepared him for this. None of it had prepared him for the realization that sometimes true power was not about control, but about knowing when to step back and recognize the worth in others. As the night went on, Omar couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed inside him. The confidence that had once been his trademark now felt fragile, almost misplaced. He wasn't sure if he would ever be the same person again. When the dinner ended, Omar did something he had never done before. He approached Tasha, who was quietly finishing her shift, and for the first time that night, he spoke to her like an equal. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice softer than it had been earlier. Tasha looked up at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. But then, just as quietly, she nodded. "You're right," she said. "But sometimes it's not about apologies. It's about making sure you don't forget the lesson." Omar stood there for a moment, processing her words. He realized she was right. An apology was a start, but it was only a start. What mattered now was what came next. The way he would change. The way he would look at the world, and at people, differently. For the first time, he understood that his wealth and influence didn't make him superior. It didn't even make him invincible. Tasha's quiet dignity had taught him that. And as he left the restaurant that night, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of humility. A sense of change. And for once, Omar Khalil didn't feel like the most powerful man in the room. He felt like a man who still had much to learn. The following days felt different for Omar Khalil. The weight of what had transpired at the dinner lingered in his mind, reshaping his outlook in ways he had not anticipated. As he moved through his usual routines, overseeing deals and meetings, he couldn't shake the image of Tasha Miller standing there, quiet yet powerful. The realization that his past arrogance had nearly blinded him to the value of others sat heavily on his conscience. Every day since that dinner, Omar had found himself questioning his previous assumptions about people. The way he had dismissed Tasha, the way he had measured worth based on wealth and status. It all seemed so trivial now. It wasn't about the deal he had lost or the public embarrassment he had endured. It was about something deeper, a shift in how he saw the world and the people in it. Tasha, with her quiet dignity, had proven that real power wasn't about control or wealth. It was about respect. Omar thought back to the moment when he had apologized to her. It had been brief, but meaningful. Tasha had nodded, not expecting anything more than a simple acknowledgement. It was clear to him now that she had been teaching him more than just humility. She had shown him the true meaning of integrity. She hadn't tried to prove herself to him. She hadn't demanded respect. She simply embodied it. And for that, he couldn't help but admire her even more. The more Omar reflected, the more he realized how many others he had overlooked in the same way. The people who worked for him, the ones who weren't part of his elite circle, they all had value that he had never taken the time to recognize. He started paying attention to them, asking about their lives, their ideas, their perspectives. It wasn't just about Tasha. It was about everyone he had dismissed over the years. He had always thought of himself as a leader, but now he understood that true leadership wasn't just about being in charge. It was about listening, about valuing those around you. Omar's change wasn't dramatic, but it was real. He started making an effort to meet with his employees one-on-one, to understand their concerns and ideas, no matter their position. His company, once driven by his need to dominate, began to shift toward a more inclusive, respectful environment. As for Tasha, she continued her work without fanfare. Omar's respect for her remained, but she never asked for it. She simply carried on with her life, doing her job with grace. But even from a distance, he could see the impact she had made, not just on him, but on everyone around him. It was subtle, but undeniable. Tasha had shown him that power wasn't something you took. It was something you earned through integrity, respect, and quiet strength. And as he moved forward, Omar knew that the lessons he had learned from her would stay with him for the rest of his life. Weeks passed, and Omar Khalil's transformation, though subtle, became increasingly apparent. His days no longer revolved around meetings and contracts alone. As he walked through his company's headquarters, he found himself pausing to greet employees by name, something he had never done before. He started to listen, to really listen, to their ideas and concerns. What had once been routine for him now felt important. He had once thought leadership was about giving orders, being the loudest in the room. But now, he understood that true leadership was about creating a space where others could thrive, where their voices were heard. It wasn't easy at first. Old habits die hard, and there were moments when he slipped back into his old ways. But each time he did, he remembered Tasha's quiet strength, her dignity, and the lessons she had unknowingly taught him. One afternoon, Omar walked into the break room, a place he used to avoid. He had heard a lot about the team working there, but never really took the time to get to know them. Today, something was different. He noticed the small group of employees gathered around, talking about an innovative idea for improving the company's services. Without thinking, he approached them, asking questions, offering suggestions, and, most importantly, showing genuine interest in their thoughts. At first, they were taken aback. They weren't used to seeing Omar so engaged, so approachable. But slowly, as the conversation continued, they warmed to him. They spoke openly, and the ideas flowed. Omar's heart swelled with a sense of fulfillment. This was what leadership was supposed to feel like, empowering others, not controlling them. The next day, Omar called a meeting with his executives. As he walked in, he could feel the familiar tension in the room. These were the people who had helped him build his empire, but they were also the ones who had encouraged him to ignore the voices of those below them. I've been thinking a lot about how we've run things. Omar began, his voice steady but firm. And I want to make some changes. It's time we start listening to everyone, not just the people at the top. The room fell silent. His executives exchanged wary glances, unsure of where this was headed. But Omar wasn't done. We're going to start valuing the ideas and contributions of everyone in this company, no matter their title or position. From now on, everyone's voice matters. The silence in the room was heavy, but it was a silence that spoke volumes. Omar's decision wasn't met with immediate applause or agreement. In fact, he could sense the skepticism in the air. But something in him had changed. He was no longer afraid to challenge the status quo. Tasha's influence had shown him that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the smallest of actions. As he left the meeting, Omar felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced before. He wasn't just changing his company, he was changing himself. And with that change, he realized he was building something far more important than just a successful business. He was building a legacy based on respect, integrity, and the recognition of the worth in every person, no matter their background. It wasn't just about making money anymore. It was about making a difference. Months passed, and the changes Omar Khalil had set in motion continued to ripple throughout his company. The shift was gradual but undeniable. Employees who had once kept their ideas to themselves now spoke up with confidence, knowing their voices would be heard. The culture in the office was different, more open, more inclusive. Omar walked through the halls of his company, now filled with a sense of pride he hadn't felt before. He no longer viewed the people around him as mere employees. They were partners. His perspective had evolved, and he couldn't ignore how much richer the company had become in terms of innovation, collaboration, and respect. One afternoon, he found himself in a meeting with his executive team. The room was filled with people he had known for years, people who had helped him build his business. But today, the conversation felt different. Instead of the usual top-down discussions, everyone was contributing. Omar sat back, listening, truly listening, as ideas bounced around the table. For the first time, he realized that the best solutions didn't always come from the top. Sometimes, they came from the most unexpected places. The younger employees, the ones who had once been too afraid to speak up, now offered fresh perspectives that changed the course of the meeting. Omar smiled to himself, feeling a sense of fulfillment. This was what leadership was about, empowering others, lifting them up, and helping them reach their full potential. Later that week, Omar had a chance encounter with Tasha at the restaurant where she worked. She didn't know he was coming, but when their eyes met, something in him shifted. She had no idea how much her quiet strength had impacted him, how much her dignity had taught him about leadership. Tasha was still the same, working diligently, offering her best without asking for recognition. Omar had come to admire that about her. He approached her slowly, as if hesitant to interrupt the flow of her day. "Tasha," he said, his voice softer than it had been the first time they met. "I just wanted to thank you. You've changed my life more than you'll ever know." Tasha looked up from her task, a brief smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I didn't do anything special," she replied with a shrug, her tone humble. Omar shook his head, a sense of gratitude swelling within him. "You've taught me the real meaning of respect," he said. "I thought I knew what power was, but now I understand it's not about control. It's about giving others the chance to rise, to be heard, and to shine." Tasha nodded, as if understanding what he meant without needing an explanation. Omar's heart swelled with something deeper than just respect. It was admiration. Tasha had no idea how much she had shaped the future of his company, and more importantly, how much she had reshaped him as a person. As he walked away from the restaurant that day, he felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. The man he was becoming, the leader he aspired to be, was one who understood the power of humility, of listening, and of recognizing the worth in others. He knew that the journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Omar Khalil felt like he was on the right path. As months turned into a year, Omar Khalil found himself constantly reflecting on the lessons that had reshaped him, not just as a businessman, but as a person. He had always measured success by numbers, by deals, by the empire he had built. But now, he understood that true success wasn't found in the balance sheets or the size of his fortune. It was found in the people around him, in the respect he had earned, and in the relationships he had nurtured. The changes within his company were profound. Employees were more engaged, more motivated. The atmosphere was collaborative, and for the first time, there was a genuine sense of unity. They weren't just working for Omar anymore, they were working with him. And Omar knew that this transformation had started with a single lesson, taught to him by someone he had once dismissed as insignificant. Tasha Miller. Over time, Omar made sure to stay connected with her, not just as a figure from his past, but as a person whose impact he would never forget. Whenever he walked into the restaurant, Tasha would greet him with the same quiet dignity. There was no fanfare, no acknowledgement of the transformation she had sparked in him. She simply continued with her work, with the same grace she had always shown. But to Omar, she was more than just a waitress. She had become a symbol of the kind of leader he strived to be, a leader who empowered others, who saw the value in everyone, no matter their position. One day, as he walked through the restaurant, Omar stopped to speak with Tasha. This time, he didn't just thank her for what she had done for him, but he recognized the quiet strength she carried with her every day. "Tasha, I've learned so much from you," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You've changed my life in ways I can't even fully explain. You showed me that leadership isn't about control. It's about respect. It's about giving people the space to grow, to share their ideas, and to be seen for who they truly are." Tasha, as always, simply nodded. Her smile was small but genuine, and Omar could see in her eyes that she wasn't looking for recognition. She had already taught him what he needed to know, and now, she was letting him take the reins. The lesson had been learned, and it had changed the course of his life. Omar continued to make strides in his business, but the foundation of his leadership had been solidified. He no longer sought to dominate. He sought to uplift, to build a culture of trust and collaboration. He knew that in order for his company to thrive, he had to recognize the value in every person, no matter their title or background. As the years passed, Omar's company flourished, not just in profits, but in the strength of its people. And as for Tasha, she continued her work, still unassuming, still the quiet force that had sparked a revolution in Omar's life. She had taught him more than any board meeting ever could. She had shown him that real power was not in taking control, it was in recognizing the worth of others, and in doing so, creating a legacy of respect and empowerment that would last for generations.